All right. As the last few people are coming through the gateway, we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for taking time out from your lunch hour or late breakfast snack, if depending on which time zone you might be in. Um, this will be our second time that we're in fact doing the cybersecurity for the rest of us. Uh, this is very informal. Feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A if you have any as we go. Um, Today, we're going to talk about Microsoft licensing and how that affects your security choices. And then also really what it does to you downstream if you have an incident and need to pull some data out of it. Um, this is neither intended to be a attack on Microsoft saying, look how complicated this is. Um, this is just too hard. Why are we doing this? Or to, in fact, tell you you should go spend a lot of money and as a sales pitch from us, because it's neither of those things, but I think both of those will probably come out. Um, and you'll just have to make some decisions as you go and say, is it important enough for me to try to do that? And, you know, can I live with the lower level licenses? Do I need to do these extra things? So this will not be death by PowerPoint, but I will show you one thing before we actually get started. Um, I mentioned briefly the choice of plan has a huge difference in what your security choices are. Obviously, it affects your cost. Um, this is the latest version of Microsoft's work plan comparison chart. And I apologize ahead of time, but this isn't my chart. This is Microsoft's. Now, this is 5 pages. And I'll just scroll through this very briefly. You've got the various options, the optional plans like EMS, and then this, see all these little dots? This says what's included, what's not included. Um, I didn't go through and count it. Probably probably half of those things in there are in fact some type of security related things. Um, Ted is in the queue. I'm going to be joined today by Ted Brown. Let's see if we can promote him. There you go. Ted, that should do the trick. Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
Hey,
it Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, Ted, thanks for jumping in.
Absolutely.
I just showed the plan comparison, not in any detail, but just to, in fact, show all those different dots that are up there. And I guess the takeaway, what's included in every plan is complex, to say the least. It's not just an issue about, do I get a 50 gig mailbox versus a 100 gig mailbox? And Ted is infinitely more familiar with all the licensing and the options. He certifies weekly in it. I probably try monthly. We say that kind of tongue in cheek, but and then on top of all of that, and Ted, feel free to chime in on this too. You know, most everybody probably is out there. You've got commercial licenses. It's what typically everybody has. Um, but Microsoft has educational licensing, nonprofit licensing, government licensing. They kind of follow the same things. I've noticed what I call a risk element on the nonprofit side, because the cost on some of those licenses is zero. And what I've noticed when I work with clients that have licenses that don't cost them any money, they don't do a very good job of cleaning up after themselves.
Yeah, they usually they come with the E1 license. I think is what the nonprofit one starts with for free, and then to get to the paid one, you go to what the E3 for nonprofit. It does cost a couple dollars, but it does add in a little bit more security and also the bigger mailbox.
And so, basically we're talking licensing here. You can go from free um, all the way up to, and I think the going rate for a commercial E5 right now is like $57.
Correct. Yeah, it gets up there, especially on the M365 over the O365 licensing, which throws another kink in all the communications out there of understanding what's the difference between the M and the
O. Same basic security settings, though, right? They didn't.
Yeah, the M365 does a job of actually throwing in the Microsoft Windows licensing SKUs in there, so you have the ability to actually license your operating system on your computer. It's also great when you look to potentially virtualize your instances and go to like a WVD model or AVD, where the M365 will include the Windows operating system as well as RDP licensing.
Got it. So in the middle of all those dots that are on that chart, there's a couple of things that I want to draw attention to. There's a license type, and this has nothing to do with E3 or E5, but it's called EMS E3 and EMS E5, and those are enterprise and mobile security. Now that layers in a bunch of security options. You can pair those with any other license, actually, I believe. It doesn't make sense sometimes to add it to any other licenses, but it is an add-on to your basic Office licensing. There's also Azure Plan 1 and Azure Plan 2, and that's included in some of the other licenses as well. I know a lot of companies use the business standard license in as an option to the business premium. But Ted, I believe business premium includes Azure P1.
It does. I mean, the M365 Business Premium is actually a really nice SKU, especially if you're underneath 300 users, because it does do the Azure Plan 1, AD Plan 1, it does the Intune as well in there, and does, well, now it used to be called Advanced Threat Protection Plan 1, now it's the Defender.
Oh, 365 Defender, yeah.
Yeah, and so it adds those extra 3 layers at the same price you typically get the O365 E3. So you really don't lose much going to the M365 Business Premium, even if you're underneath 300 users, and adds the extra three other available security features in there. The gotcha, though, which I find people sometimes forget, if you go to the M365 E3, it includes the Intune, but it does not include the Windows Defender for your anti-spam. You actually have to add that in there. So I don't know why that one was left out or not. So that's
interesting.
Microsoft question, a little asterisk there.
So if you were able to follow that and pick up all the acronyms and things that we threw around in there, what used to be ATP, Advanced Threat Protection, is now called O365 Defender. Now, your basic O365 environment includes some minimal filtering and spam protection and stuff like that. But it's, it's the basic. It's looking for all the obvious stuff, and Microsoft will filter that out. ATP gives you a lot more capability. And in particular, it gives you some additional preventions against business email compromise. These options and these extra little policies that are built in there do have to be set up and configured. It's not like they're going to work for you exactly out of the box. We're recommending, and Ted, you can throw your 2 cents on this too. This is kind of what I say is typical Microsoft. A year ago, ATP was kind of, it's okay, right? It's, is it worth a few extra bucks a month? Maybe. But I don't know. Right now, it seems like it's a pretty good little package.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's up there with the big guys out there for the anti-spam solutions. Mimecast, the Proofpoint, it does a great job of it doing attachment protection, link protection, and it also has the extra capability because it's built inside of Microsoft. So if we look into your OneDrive and your SharePoints and your Teams, and actually goes throughout all the options within Microsoft 365, not just your Exchange solution.
Okay. And then this is a great segue into some of the other options. And Ted already mentioned Intune. A lot of companies, and especially since COVID, and we're seeing this all the time, Companies that had been in a hybrid or had an on-premise Active Directory really as part of their overall cloud migration strategy. And in some cases, it's because we're giving up the office. There won't be a return to the office because we figured out we don't need a physical space. Um, Azure AD and Intune is a great option for identity and access management if you want to move away from on-premise Active Directory. If you already are in the cloud, but don't have some centralized identity and access management, and that means a centralized place for users above and beyond just creating their mail account, right? This is, a little bit more level of complexity. You want people to log into their computers. You want the computer to belong to an Azure domain. Um, Azure AD and Intune is a great way to go ahead and implement that. Now, again, you're not going to turn it on and it's going to work out of the box. It's got to be set up and configured. Um, and I guess that's included with Azure AD. The extended Azure AD is included now with all the extended licenses, all the upper licenses.
Cool.
The Intune with a lot of them, but I think you can add that option, I could think, to any license, right?
What, add the Intune license into them?
Yeah.
Yeah, Intune is a separate package that can be added if it's not included. And one of the other pieces of Intune that is actually really nice, unfortunately, like Frank said, you have to configure it. It doesn't all work out of the box. But one of the pieces that's actually exciting for me is the autopilot, where you can actually start working with it. So you can set up policies for when new computers are actually provisioned. When you buy them from Dell, they can be added right into the autopilot. So it'll be set up for the user immediately. You can even be called like white gloved hand off. We can actually have the device shipped straight to the end user. They type in their credentials, and the credentials are actually provision the actual computer exactly how it was supposed to meant to be set up. So it actually doesn't have to hand off to a tech to get it configured. So it's pretty powerful.
And if so, number one, that's a good idea. You have a baseline setup on a computer. It's centrally set up. Here's the applications that you're allowed to put on it. Here's your default install. Typical users do not get local administrative rights as a result of that. That's a good idea just out of the get-go. So everybody should do that.
Well, even the simplicity of just being able to hand the device to somebody else. So say employee X leaves, you need a pre-provision device for someone else, you can just hit the re-provision button. It puts it actually right back to the default settings. You hand it off to the next user, they sign in with their creds, and it sets it back up just to them. So you don't have to worry about this whole erase the computer, bring it back to your tech, hand it out. It can just be a flawless couple clicks of the button and go.
Oh man, that almost sounds too good to be true.
Yeah, no, I think, but the thing is, again, just like you said, it all comes down to how you want to configure it, how you want to set up. It's just basically almost like how SharePoint is. SharePoint is a wonderful application you can use, but you have to configure it what makes sense for you and the customer. And so that's just the point of actually just going through the steps of getting it where it works for you. And each person's different, and each company's different, and making sure the applications are correct.
So if you don't accept the fact that it's a good idea to do that, if you have any type of compliance standards, so you're trying to meet a high trust or a NIST or a CMMC, anything that has a basic framework that says you have to comply with, within those frameworks, ISO 27001, right? That's not even a mandatory one, but I know a lot of companies comply with it. The most basic types of things that you need to do include baselining configurations, monitoring the configurations, using the concept of least privilege, which means typically if somebody doesn't absolutely need some type of administrative access, you don't give it to them. And that's also, by the way, a way of helping prevent malware, ransomware, and things like that from spreading. But the autopilot is an outstanding way to help you meet those compliance requirements. You do that with Intune because you're going to have some type of an identity and access management piece. You've got these baseline configurations you need to do. Great solution out of the box. Not going to tell you have to have an E5 license to get any of that done, right? You've got to look at the licensing that makes sense for your company. Get the one that you think is the best deal. You got to have a licensing expert probably sit down with you and say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah, and the key part of that is also what license works for one user might not be the best for the next user. So you can do some mix and matches. So say for the most part, if all clients meet a certain category, you can get away with doing the M365 Business Premium. But say you have a couple high-level executives that need to have a larger mailbox, then maybe it makes sense to have those go up to the E3 license. So you can do this mix and match because it's really nice how they set it up that they have Microsoft licenses called like the bucket fashion, or as long as they have a license that meets that the particular aspect you're trying to use in that bucket, it works. So you don't have to have everyone be on the same platform.
So that is a great segue into a point that I'm going to make that is not intentionally disagreeing with you, that says get the license that makes sense. I'm going to put a caveat on that that says try to minimize the number of license types you have in your organization. And there's a couple reasons for that. So, many of you are probably already customers of Intiva. You send us a ticket via email and said, I have a new user starting Monday, please set up his account. If you have 7 different types of licensing within your environment, you've got to then specify which licenses get added to which users. Then we have to say, okay, well, we're going to have to add licensing for this license type. And you might have extra licenses of something else, depending on how you got them and everything else. The KISS model applies here. The other reason for that is that when you start getting into these license add-ons, and I'm not talking about somebody that needs Project or Visio or anything like that, but if you've got groups and say you've got EMS E3s and some EMS E5s, it gets really complicated when you try to figure out, I want this group of users to have E3s and plus EMS E5, but these users should have EMS E5 on top of their E5s, and these guys are exchange only, and it just gets really complex to kind of try to keep a track of it. It also opens up the environment for errors. I meant for this person to have that, and I forgot to say apply that license. So
yeah, I agree with that. And just in case there's a need to go down that path, you can start taking a look at potentially using groups for licensing. So you can actually have, say, I want this specific subset of users to always have this set of licensing. So you can license it per role function and say, I want to make sure that the role function for accounting always gets this subset of licensing, and boom, anyone who adds that group gets that. So there's ways to make sure if you get to a large scale deployment that you can try to minimize the actual burden of making sure to remember exactly which license to add instead of correct once as a template and go from there.
So I'm going to steer us over to MFA, and I'll apologize in advance because I'll get preachy and say, please have MFA enabled on all your Microsoft accounts, period. I just can't even tell you the number of times I see some type of a compromise. Somebody got into an O365 tenant and MFA was not enabled. MFA is not 100%. No solution is. A concerted actor, mainly the nation state actors that you've been reading about in the newspaper and stuff, they are able to find ways to circumvent MFA. But for your typical environment where somebody is trying to come in and they're going to try to do some fake invoices, fake ACH information, stuff like that, they come in, they've picked up compromised credentials, or they get you on a password spray attack. They get into your tenant. If they get prompted for MFA, they're going to move on to the next tenant. They're not going to waste the time to do it. Please enable it. It's free with every single account. Now, there are degrees of MFA, and it changes a little bit, and we're not going to get into that today. But But if you've got any of these other licenses, you've got the business premium, you've got the Azure MFA, extra capabilities, things that are built into it. Please enable that. I can't stress that enough. If you have the right licensing, and this is where it gets a little dicey again, Azure P1 gives you the ability to have conditional access policies. Conditional access policies are superior to enabling MFA on a per user basis. So if we won't get into it, make a note, talk to your account manager and say, do I have conditional access policies available to me, and what will it take to get that turned on? That is a superior way to enforce multi-factor authentication. You can do some other things with it too. I mean, you can do some geographical restrictions. There's all kinds of things you can do there. But at a bare minimum, use conditional access policies to enforce multi-factor authentication. Ted, do you want to chime in on just what all that is?
Yeah, no, what the conditional access thing piece of it, I mean, it's definitely the way to go if you have the capability of getting there. And it really, and we kind of mentioned the SKU a couple of times. The M365 Business Premium includes it. One of the misnomers I see out there in the industry is because once you add one Azure AD P1 to a tenant, it allows you to use conditional access. And so what I've seen some companies do is they'll add one in there, but they have actual 50 users and try to get away with just having that one be the one applied to all. That's a big no-no with Microsoft. And when they come to audit you, which will happen eventually, it will be a fine, and of course, pay the 15 to 20% over what you would have paid for it for the life cycle. So I've seen that a couple of times out in their blogs of suggesting a way to get around that extra fee. Please don't go down that route. It's best just to get the right SKU with what you're able to do with it. And the conditional access does a great job of making sure it enforces the entire company to be set up for 365. New user gets provisioned. You don't have to worry about, hey, was it actually added to it or not? Because the enforcement level at conditional access will force them through the process and potentially even help them get through and set up the enrollment of the device. And I always kind of hear the back and forth. Well, I don't want to take the extra time to go, do the multi-factor authentication. At the end of the day, it's so easy now on the devices. It's really just, really right. If you have a device that has biometrics, I just touch my finger on it and it lets me right on through. It really doesn't slow down the process at all. And yeah, I mean, I'm seeing customers come to us because they have what cyber insurance needs. They're requiring the MFA across the bat. So if you have any needs to have cyber insurance, which most customers are going to have, you have to have MFA enforced, and it's required now to actually get those policies.
Yeah, I excuse me, I helped a client about 2 weeks ago with a cyber application, and they had actually created the insurance company that is, had created a rider, a 3-page addendum questionnaire, which was, do you use this and do you have MFA? Do you use this and do you have MFA? And if you answered no to any of the questions, they considered you uninsurable.
Yeah.
Just flat out, they were just not going to insure you. Ted, in our final 5 minutes, let's talk just real briefly, if I have an incident, the different licensing and what does it help me do? So what I've seen in the last year is that people find things out. A tenant was compromised, there was an email hack, whatever it was. Somebody says, oh, employee X left and I need some data about what maybe they accessed on the SharePoint in their last month. There is some differences in logging. You spend more money on a licensing and it gives you more logs. What can you share there?
Yeah, I feel unfortunate. I feel it's actually a miss on Microsoft's side. I really think the logging should be a year regardless of what license you have, just because of everything that's happening out there in the wild. The E5 licensing, M365 E5, the O365 E5, they give you the 1 year and above retention policies. But really, if you have like an E1, E3 business premium, you have capability going up to 90 days. And there's some tricks to actually get to go to a year, but it's not necessarily a easy path to go down to actually get there. There's some blogs out there to actually see how you can do it, but really it's the 90 days. And then anything else below that is about a month long. So if you have just an exchange plan one, if you have, any other type of SKU, the Microsoft 365 Business Standard or Essentials, it doesn't quite get that same level of logging. Now, you could go to the other side of it and say, hey, maybe I want to have a SIM in there, another log system that's outside of 365 to pull in and ingest that information. And that way you don't have to worry about the retention on 365, which is probably a good way to go. But it's, again, an extra fee that's not included with your licensing. So it's always best to try to take advantage as much as you can of what license you have. And just to kick back on something else, just before we get complete with the logging, that's just another thing I recommend is just saying, hey, just because you're using a 365 license doesn't mean you're getting the most out of it. It's always best to take a look to see what else can you combine, like email encryption. I see people not using email encryption where it's included in your E3 licensing, Microsoft 365 Business Premium, where you're able to send encrypted emails back and forth to each other, which contain, PII or something, and it's already at your fingertips to use, just might not be enabled.
Yeah. And in our final couple of minutes, I'll say one other thing that you get, and I think it requires an E5. Microsoft has done great things with the Security and Compliance Center in the last year. There's, some of it is some things moving around, but there's been a lot of capability added to it. One of the things that I get questions on all the time is on assessment templates, where client says, can somebody give me an assessment of what the configuration of my O365, my M365 is? And I don't even know how many templates, but there's a ton of them. Unfortunately, to access some of the templates requires E5 licensing. And for those of you out there that are GovCon, that have NIST 800, that have CMMC, those are the ones I get asked the most about it. The templates for those are considered premium templates, and they do require E5 licensing. So, take a look. I'd say certainly ask periodically. Check with your account manager, check with your Microsoft reps, depending on how you're licensed. Ask us. I mean, we're happy to chime in and throw some thoughts out there. But as Ted said, definitely take advantage of what you're already paying for, right? Before you start paying for something else, look at what you've got and make sure that it's being implemented correctly and completely, and that you're taking advantage of all the things in there. And, we're happy to help you take a look at those licenses. It's a non-trivial thing. And I'll be the first to admit that I can't keep up with it. I think even Ted, you probably feel overwhelmed sometimes trying to keep up with it.
It's too fluid. They change it all the time. Keep you on your toes, and I guess it keeps you learning. So it's definitely good. But yeah, again, what's there today might change tomorrow, even with the templates. So it's always best to check, just like you said, because I really feel at some point this is going to go down the chain and come down to the lower level of subscriptions just because the need out there.
Yeah, and back after the SolarWinds problem in December, when the heads of Microsoft, FireEye, and SolarWinds were testifying on the Hill, I believe it was the chairman of the committee that was doing the questioning said, why is security a cost center or a profit center at Microsoft? And the president of Microsoft said, well, Microsoft is in the business of making a profit. But we're hoping that some of these things will in fact find their way down into the other licensing schemes. From your standpoint, take a look at it. If it means upgrading licenses, some of that is going to be cost of doing business, and other businesses are going to be doing the same thing. So it's not necessarily going to place you at a competitive disadvantage. Losing a couple of $100,000 in an email attack with some bad ACH information, that's going to affect you more than any license changes are. So, Ted, that takes us right up to 12:30. Thank you for giving up your lunch half hour. I don't see any questions in the queue, so we will wrap it up for this time. If you need anything, please reach out to us, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, pleasure joining you. You guys enjoy your day.